in this episode of the Critical Oxygen podcast.
It's like individualization, but how do you know what is best for you? And, just to wrap it back into this is like, you need to track things. You need to track how is your physiology changing over time? How is your blood tracking over time?
But I also think it's a form of education, right? Like,
right.
You'll learn and remember forever. Like, I don't know, everyone who's tracked their food, right, learned how calories work, how protein works, how fat works.
Yeah.
Like, you learn that I don't know, my experience was I was drastically under consuming protein, and that's like what most people experiences is, and you were like way overeating in terms of like portions of sugar and like different things like that. Like, and I never forgot it, right? Like, I know I don't track my food all the time, but whenever I look at my plate, I like have a distinct memory of like what I'm doing and what's happening. And so once you sort of start to learn the impact of sleep on testosterone, for example, like you don't forget. And then when you're like, I'm not recovering properly, what's going on? And then you're looking at your deep sleep. And so it's more an education journey than like being like a data nerd or like whatever it is, or like obsessing over everything too much.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing.
Today I'm joined by Robby Wade. He's the founder and CEO of Rythm Health, which is a monthly blood tracking service that tracks your hormones and metabolic health, all from the comfort of your own home. Robby Wade, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here, man. And it was really nice to meet you in Kona, and looking forward to a good chat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a little bit of backstory is like a lot of the times when I go on, trips to, say like Kona, like the Ironman Kona or Ironman Nice or other things like that. Like some of my favorite things to do is just go around to the vendors and just talk to whoever's there. And I was walking around the vendor village at Kona, and I saw this, tent that just said Rythm on it. I was like, what the heck is Rythm? And then there was like, there's a little computer, and it was like, oh, at-home blood tracking service. And I was like, okay, this is, I'm intrigued. And then all of a sudden this guy comes up to me, hey guys, like lots of energy, like all this sort of stuff. Would you be interested in doing a blood test today? And I'm like, first of all, hell yeah. Second of all, who are you? And it turned out to be Robby. And it was one of those things where it was like, I have been looking for something that would allow me to do blood tracking. I don't even know. I was just like, man, it'd be so nice if I could do this in an affordable manner and all of this sort of stuff. So it just so happened that Rythm seems to be, that sort of testing service. And I'm not sponsored or anything like that. I just got to know Robby, and I really like, like his business and his philosophy and other things like that. And we wound up talking probably for way too long because there were a lot of people coming to the booth, and I was just like, oh, wait, what about this? And then we started talking about like flow state, and all of a sudden we were talking about like how he was running the booth the entire week and then also going to do the Kona Ironman. And I was like, how the heck are you doing it? He's like, oh, I'm not even thinking about it. I'm just, so then we started talking about psychology. So, needless to say, I told Robby, I was like, hey man, I'm really interested in getting you on the show because I think this is a really cool business. And, I just want to share it with people because it gets me really excited. So before we actually jump into Rythm Health and what it is, Robby, why don't you give people a little bit of an introduction of, like who you are, like maybe what the genesis of Rythm Health actually was, and then we can get into, what it is.
Yeah. Who you are is a huge question, difficult one to answer. We were just talking about that. I'm Australian. So I moved to the US. It's a long background as to how I got into rhythm specifically, but a pretty, it's that old saying where when you connect the dots looking backwards, things are often obvious, more so than what they would be in foresight. But my dad had a kidney transplant when I was really young, and so like he was on dialysis in the house. We actually had like a cupboard in the kitchen called like a dialysis cupboard that was just full of needles and like all that sort of stuff. And he passed away when I was younger, but it left a pretty big impact on me. Like I say this in the most positive of ways, but my dad was kind of a patient most of my life. So that sort of led to me focusing pretty heavily on health and fitness personally, but also being really comfortable with doing health related things from home, right? Like it's an at-home blood testing service. I grew up in a house that literally had a dialysis machine in the living room. And not that that's something that you want, but like, it sort of explains why I ended up running a company of this nature. And so I wouldn't have seen that back then, but it definitely has played a big role. Outside of that, health and fitness is a huge part of my life. Like outside of being running Rythm, I compete in triathlon. So as an amateur, I was competing in Kona, but I also do ultra distance running and stuff like that. Now, how Rythm started, we were actually working on a health and fitness dashboard, like kind of like the equivalent of like a Garmin or Apple Health kind of thing that like tracks from your wearable. We were working with a service provider that had asked if we wanted to try one of these devices. And so what these little devices are is what we actually use to collect the blood. And so what you do is you just put it on your arm, press the button. It's completely painless, fills up with blood in 1 to 2 minutes. And like I did it for the first time, and it just blew my mind. Like, and I was looking around. I'm like, no one is using these things. They just got FDA cleared like a year ago. And so I just literally stopped everything I was doing and went all in on this because, like you, I've been wanting to be able to track my blood more efficiently. Like I kind of going to the lab, like I'm pretty comfortable with needles. I don't love them, but like I'm not afraid of needles or whatever. But it's more what I'm more afraid of is like having to go to LabCorp and like sit in that sterile room and wait. Like I'm actually most afraid of having to like not have coffee for like 4 hours in the morning until I like get to the lab and like all that kind of stuff. Whereas like I've literally done these while I'm like laying in bed with like my arm hanging out and like just have a coffee like straight after. And so, but then also how unbelievably painless it is. Like that is like one of my favorite parts of this product is like how shocked people are when they use it. So yeah, like I would say the device actually enabled the company at the end of the day, and we can get into what we're doing differently to everybody else. But yeah, to answer your question in terms of how it started, it's two things. A very keen focus on health from my experience with my dad, being comfortable doing health related things from home. Like it's very normal for me in that sense to have a centrifuge at home, which I can explain in a sec. And then discovering the perfect device for this type of product in that sense. So that's sort of how we landed here.
Yeah, that's really cool. So how did that device like become what it is? Because I during my PhD I was doing blood draws all the time, and one of the things that would get us time and time again was like we would get these really small individuals who don't have very much body fat on them, probably don't exercise very much, so they don't have very big veins, and we would not be able to get a stable blood draw for them.
Yeah.
And this seems like it is kind of a like a solve for something like that. Like it takes the challenge of placing a needle, which is like that was something like my advisors would always say, yeah, you should learn how to do this, like during my PhD and other things like that, the phlebotomy sort of stuff. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I don't really want to do that. So do you know like how somebody came up with that device? What is it called? Does it have a name?
So this device is called a TASO. There's a few different versions of this one. This one just happens to be my favorite. I just think it aesthetically looks the best. Like some of them have like big handles and like just look a little bit scarier in that sense. Like this one's like I'd almost use the word like cute in that sense. I mean, it's a pretty simple device at the end of the day. I think it was just more about getting FDA clearance and like another question a lot of people have is like, why isn't everyone using them? There are challenges with this device. Like, I mean, before that, people were using finger pricks, and your finger, like the finger prick blood drop goes onto a dried piece of paper, and it's not as accurate, but it stays stable longer. They sort of dry the blood out, so then you can send it through the mail, and it doesn't get compromised with hemolysis and whatnot. Whereas this is wet blood, so you're collecting wet blood from home. It's also kind of like an inefficient amount of blood, like compared to what you would do in a lab. We've all heard the Theranos story. The only thing you need to understand about Theranos is it's the amount of blood you collect is directly determines how many biomarkers you can test. Like you need certain amount of volume per biomarker. So their sort of thing was with one blood drop, you can test 60 biomarkers, for example. We're only testing 10 to 12. And so we are
Right.
limited by volume. So you could ask why companies like LabCorp and stuff don't use it. At the end of the day, these devices aren't cheap. It's probably to buy one of these $15, and then you got to
Mm.
post it, and then you've got to collect the blood. Then you have to keep it stable while you post it back to the lab. And there's a lot of inefficiencies that we had to build our entire product around to solve for. It is much easier to get a customer to come in, use basically a costless needle that takes like 3 seconds, that can draw an enormous amount of blood and test for a huge amount of biomarkers. So it's kind of like efficiency wise, it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So a lot of people haven't really found a way to use this type of product. So I think that's why it's not sort of like widely understood. Whereas we've found a unique product that actually makes sense for this device. So yeah, I would say it's coming into it, and it's still early days. I mean, they're working on longer tubes and like a variety of different like mailing mechanisms and stuff. And it's very clear to me that over the next 5 to 10 years, more and more to a point of a majority of your sort of health testing and tracking is going to be done from home. It's just a much, much better experience. And so we're just going into that evolution right now. So I would just say it's just early. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I constantly think about with, both my physiology job for Moxie Monitor, which is really how we met, and then my, kind of other, jobs, which are critical oxygen and doing physiology testing for people, is I would really love if, we could start doing pretty accurate, in-home physiological testing for an individual. We just prescribe a workout, and then we have, kind of like the, say NIRS device or whatever device we use as our physiological monitor. And then from that, you get your personalized, testing zones and training zones and other things like that. You can tell people, oh, my VO2 max is this based on this test that I did. And the more that we can eliminate the barriers for, like, say, having to go somewhere, like you were saying, like when I go into LabCorp, it's, this sterile room. I haven't eaten in 4 hours, I haven't eaten all night. And then for another few hours, you're probably kind of grumpy because, you haven't had your coffee. And, sometimes the people who are doing the blood draws, and I'm not saying this is for this, everybody does this, but they're a little rough with you, in a sense, right? They're just like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to, like pull your arm over, clean it off with some alcohol and just like, put that needle in and then, send you on your way. And I'm like, man, like it is definitely a stressful process.
For sure.
So, and the fact is that, for the most part, you can't really get blood work tracked month to month, which is something that just like really blows me away. I've had troubles in the past because I'm a healthy young man, going in and being like, hey, like I would really like to get like this full panel of blood work, and then I get discouraged, from actually doing it. And now that, there's companies like Rythm coming out where it's like, okay, just do it from your home. All you got to do is go send it in, and then I can track it month to month. Or you kind of said in if I'm butchering your words, it's kind of like a butcher box sort of thing where you could pause if you don't want to do the month to month as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I that's like one of the features that we're sort of working on right now. And like, just to touch on something, like, I think it's really important to not think about our product, and I know this goes without saying, but as like a medical substitute in that sense. Like, I would actually say that we're closer to like a Garmin wearable than we are your doctor. At the end of the day, we've specifically focused on markers that doctors don't typically test for because it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like, testing hormones once a year isn't really that useful. And there's like, oftentimes doctors are testing for things that give you objective answers, like, do you have anemia? Yes or no? Like,
Right.
do you need to go to hospital? Like, I actually think of the doctor as like a gateway to hospital or a prescription. Like, everyone goes to their doctor expecting them to improve their like health and performance and stuff. It's not their job. Like, at the end of the day, you're kind of like, they're not an extension to the gym or whatever it might be. But yeah, like, I would say what we are actually focused on is like, we're not focused on doing a test to see if you have cardiovascular heart disease or Alzheimer's or whatever it is. I wake up every day pretty certain I don't have those things. I'm much more interested in like, how do I increase my energy? How do I increase my libido? How do I recover faster? How do I build muscle faster? How do I increase my like metabolic flexibility? They're the answers that you're going to get from your hormones and your metabolic markers. And it's interesting, man. Like, you can find things that you would never expect. Like, even after Kona, I've told the story a number of times, but me and my girlfriend kind of like drove around in a van, like afterwards. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of like, I was tired, but more tired than usual, but just like really irritable. Like everything about the van was just frustrating me. Like the sliding door wasn't working properly and like climbing in and out of it. I was like fine recovery wise. Like I could walk around and like all these things. Like I know I did an Ironman, but like, I train a lot. It's not my first one. I'm pretty comfortable like with that sort of thing. It was tough, but like,
Mm-hmm.
what was interesting was like I would have left that trip being like, I didn't enjoy the van. I don't want to do van trips anymore, all these kind of things. But I had been tracking my blood um like pre-race, post-race, after. And like my
Nice.
testosterone was like in the floor, my estrogen was through the roof. So like hormonally, I was destroyed, like in that
Yep.
sense. And so it had absolutely nothing to do with the van. I was just irritable. I was not in a good place. Like I was just someone who should not have been in a position like that. Like I needed to be like at home resting and all these kind of things. So, but
Right.
mentally, the story I was telling myself was like, this kind of sucks. I don't want to do this again. But it actually had
Mm-hmm.
absolutely nothing to do with what I was doing. It was what was happening internally, hormonally to me that was influencing my experience. So like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, don't just underestimate, like it's not just about like how do I improve my marathon time or like whatever. Like these things can be having direct impacts on your friendships, relationships, your emotional resonance, like all of those kind of things. It's like kind of wild the scope at which it actually kind of influences.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's interesting though, like the way you're talking about it because I've had, like been diagnosed with like say low testosterone and,
Yeah.
low vitamin D and had symptoms of like chronic kind of depressive disorder and other things like that with like higher anxiety and those sort of things. But, other than, just going and getting, blood work done, once, once a quarter, once every half a year, once a year, I never knew, like, I never really know like where things are trending and how they're going. And I think doing the blood work over time gives you just like if you're tracking HRV, just like if you're tracking, your heart
Correct.
rate while you're working out, it's giving you kind of like what is like your normal, what is your baseline, and then it's showing you deviations. And deviations either lower or higher, especially for HRV, for example, can indicate that you're not in a state of proper parasympathetic and sympathetic balance.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm
I
sure,
just to interrupt you there, I swear
go
I can
ahead.
like look at my HRV and I can kind of see before I'm getting sick that I'm getting sick. Like, have you ever
Hmm.
noticed like when it like sort of like starts to crash pretty aggressively? I'm like, okay, in like a
It
couple of
was,
days, I'm probably gonna hit the earth.
I had, so I haven't really had that because I use the Aura ring and I
Okay,
think because HRV is measured kind of earlier in the night,
right.
it's more affected by, say like what I ate, if I drank alcohol, if I,
Mm,
had was stressed before I went to bed, it's more affected by that. Whereas I think if I was doing HRV like in the morning, which is the typical recommendation that I've heard from people who, are like, well, if you want to know your training readiness, then track it in the
yeah,
morning. I'm sure if we were headed down the path of getting sick, that HRV would be going down, right? And I did have an experience, not with the Kona trip, but with the Ironman Nice trip, where I got really sick after the like my plane ride over to London, and my HRV went from, oh, it was like, 60, 65 to like 10 or 20 for like the days that I was actually sick. And I was like, oh, like obviously something's going on. I am sick. It's a higher stress on the body. Um,
I have a pretty unique
but
perspective on HIV, and this is like not grounded in any study, just like anecdotally something I've noticed. So, by the way, if anyone fact checks me and this is like completely wrong, I'm literally like I'll put it hands down. I'm making this up right now, but
yeah.
it's a pattern that I've noticed at the very least. Everyone always says that your HRV, and this is like actually plays into something I was going to mention about ranges. Your HRV should be higher. Like everyone says, higher HRV the better, right?
Right.
I
Right.
swear I've worked on everything from meditation to breath work to diet changes to absolutely everything. And like my HRV never gets higher than when it's good. Like, so for example, good for me is in like kind of the high 60s. If I get to 70, like I'm doing really well, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like my partner is always in the 90s, just
Yep.
easily, right? And so, and then, if we go into winter, where I don't know if a lot of people know this, but like your HRV actually drops in winter and goes back up in summer. So just also take awareness of that. Like in that sense, if you notice your HRV is coming down over the next couple of months, especially if you're in like sort of the American hemisphere of the Earth, going into winter, your HRV is going to drop by 5 to 10 points roughly on average. But I've noticed people who are what I would say like higher energy, more intense, I guess the way you like described me, not necessarily I don't know how to explain this, not anxious or anything, you just people who have a level of intensity to them often have lower HRVs, and people who are more generally like go with the flow, calm people have higher HRVs.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's like personality, like it's more like character driven. Like I will never be somebody. It's just not in my nature to be that sort of like go with the flow. I'm sure if I invested enough time into it, I just don't think so. But I've also noticed people who have lower HRVs typically have higher max heart rates as well, and vice versa. I've done no study on this or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of just an interesting little like tidbit, and I've just noticed, like people who are just more intense just have that lower HRV, and obviously, like your intensity level means you're gonna burn the candle at both ends a little bit more, and just stuff, just generally speaking, who you are. But yeah, I just think it's like an interesting little factor. But the reason I also was going to touch on that was like, actually, I'll let you jump in and then I'll
Yeah.
finish up.
Yeah. No. So everything that you're saying, I've seen correlations, with the same type of thing. I'm a very type A personality, and my HRV on like when it's really good, like if I'm like, really recovered from the weekend, I didn't, drink any alcohol or do anything, kind of silly to, like stress myself out. It might get up to 60, 65.
Yeah.
My buddy who is like, like a lot more kind of, I think, like relaxed, like he, it's like, well, dude, sometimes I got to light a fire under your butt, to like get you to go do stuff. He's like, I'll get to it when I get to it. But then he gets to it eventually. His normal is like 100 or 120. And this is milliseconds. So, like there's obviously a ton of different ways of measuring, HRV and those sort of things. But yeah, so I wonder if, like the type A personality to like somehow drives, like an overall lower, HRV just because of the the constant, stress you're maybe mentally putting on yourself or something like that. And if anyone is out there who is actually like an HRV expert and has kind of looked at this sort of stuff, please DM me and I would love to talk about that, because this is that it would be really cool just to see if like say personality type kind of does align with average HRV. And we do know that it's deviations from your average that are really telling you one way or the other, how things are changing. And even an increase, can be indicative of, kind of like a flux in your ability to deal with stress. So it could go up or down, and you might have negative outcomes both ways. So you want to have, kind of like steady HRV with, like slowly decreasing it. Say if you're training, do kind of like that progressive overload, then release the gas pedal, overcompensate, and then do it again. And that's, kind of like, that's how training should kind of be, are these undulations in HRV, obviously to a point. But yeah, so this whole, like line of thinking and talk was all about, well, we're tracking what we can track to see how we can then become better. And now you can actually start to track your blood markers. And you told me earlier, you said you guys particularly say tracking, not testing. So I think it's we should touch on that and then go into that line of thinking that you were thinking about with the HRV stuff as well.
Yeah, so I'll flip it around, but I'll cover both. The reason I brought up that HRV thing is like, I think it's when anyone says to you like the higher the better, I think it can make a lot of people feel like there's something wrong with them. But it's more about you figuring out like what's right for you. And as you said, like you kind of want to know your like rolling 7-day average over like a 3-month period is kind of like, and then like maintain that like baseline, and consistency is better. That's also something that you can do with tracking. So like that's something we're working on right now is like, how do we create your own reference range? Like a lot of people don't know this, but like the lab reference ranges based on like a normal distribution of the average American, right? Like it's actually got absolutely nothing to do with you personally as to whether
Right.
you fit in that range or not. And like, it's not an impressive feat to just be in the normal range. There's a lot of like, I actually have got the normal ranges from the labs, and like it's scary, like how far you can push things before you're considered like out of range. Like it's, yeah. So we have a optimal range that's tighter, but I think what would be even more interesting is like, what's your personal normal range? Kind of like that
Mm-hmm.
HRV one where it's determined by your rolling average,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to stay within that rolling average. And if you can raise that rolling average, fantastic. But at minimum, you want to stay consistent, like in that sense. And so, yeah. And so that when it comes to like tracking versus testing, the reason I say that is like obviously, we're doing it once a month, which is different to what people typically would have done. And we've chosen to do that for a variety of different reasons, which we can get into. But I like the language of track versus test because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to do this collection and think it's like a pass or fail scenario. Like people go to the doctor once a year and they call it a physical, and the way it's actually structured is as if it's a test. You go there and you're like, woohoo! I don't need to go to hospital. I'm out of here, right? Like it's like a pass or fail kind of like scenario. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
like when you wear your Aura to bed at night, you don't go, okay, I'm testing my sleep tonight, and then you wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, passed. Like it's more about tracking and learning. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
learning about sleep, you're learning about what drinking does, you're learning about what Netflix does, you're learning what deep sleep is and REM is. We want to give you that same experience, except like most people have heard the word testosterone, they don't know a single thing about it. Like in that sense, it's more about like what influences your testosterone, what influences your
Mm-hmm.
cholesterol levels, what's influencing your vitamin D levels and all and those things as well. So you build that same relationship that you built with sleep because you're tracking, and that experience is
Mm-hmm.
going to teach you. Like I can tell you right now, like you can read that alcohol affects your sleep, right? And then you can like drink alcohol and then see a score of 40, and they're two very different things. Like in
Right.
that sense, the experience is what's actually going to settle it in your mind in terms of, how like behavior change actually manifests. And like, I've actually been shocked by how many people have stopped drinking as soon as they start tracking their sleep or dialed their drinking back, because you see in
Mm-hmm.
real time what you actually did. And you have this similar experience sometimes with like CGMs. You like eat a donut and like see it just like go through the roof, and you're like, oh
Mm-hmm.
man. And it's the reality check that kind of like stops you and makes you think about it next time. So I guess we're sort of taking that same approach with the tracking.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's the value in it, right? Is you start to see measurable outcomes. And this is where I talk to people all the time about like physiological testing. And there's a lot of coaches out there who are like, well, I don't really see the value in physiological testing. And I'm like, no, there's value in it because you're tracking it over time and you give people the ability to see a number and see how that number is changing. And there seems to be more control over if your outcome gives you a number, right? And then education behind it. So for example, if I tested an individual for a VO2 max test and their VO2 max test came back a little bit low, I don't say, well, you failed your VO2 max test. I say the the challenge is that your VO2 max is a little bit low, but the good news is that there's all these interventions that we can do that can make your VO2 max better.
Yep.
So, whatever you're willing to do, let's see if we can come to common ground and have you practice or implement something new into your life that will then hopefully raise your VO2 max, and then we'll test it in 4 weeks and 6 weeks and 8 weeks, however, long the time frame is, and we'll see if there's progress. If there's no progress, then we need to change something. If there is progress, then we'll probably keep it the same, honestly. And then, and so it's this feedback mechanism. As long as the feedback mechanism doesn't make you so neurotic that it's a negative for things, right? Because there are some people who start tracking their sleep and they're doing exactly like what you're saying. They're, oh, well, it's a pass or fail. Like if I get bad sleep, then then my whole day is going to be ruined. It's like, no, no, no. It's just a touch point. It's look at the number, see how different things affect it, and then, kind of manage it throughout your day. And actually, just to unveil, a little bit more of like one of the reasons, one of the things that actually affects my sleep quality the absolute most is marijuana consumption. It is like my resting heart rate doesn't come down for a really long time. My HRV drops super, super low. And, so it's one of those things that immediately when I saw that, I was like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't be consuming, THC or marijuana or whatever it is, because of that sort of interaction. It just gives you kind of that feedback mechanism to say, well, every time if you drink alcohol and your sleep goes to shit, then here's why: your deep sleep goes away. Your REM sleep might take, might be a smaller percentage of your actual sleep. And that's what I'm hoping to use my blood tracking for is, and this isn't medical advice. I am a doctor, but I'm a PhD. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm sure Robby would say the same thing. If you really think something is wrong after you go and do, like one of your blood tracking things with Rythm, go to your consult with your doctor and say, hey, what do I need to do to actually raise this or get it better? But for me, practical example, most of the stuff, so I did the blood test in Kona, or the tracking in Kona. It came back, my testosterone was low, not really surprising because I'm a pretty stressed out individual most of the time. And, we were on a trip, so I was pretty stressed in that regard as well. But then my vitamin D was super low as well. And I'm sure you probably see this all the time, but there's the optimal range, and then it was like between 0 and 0.2 or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, the good news is that I'm going to get another blood test in 10 days. And, so let's see if supplementing, taking, 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day for the next 10 days, if that can raise it maybe a little bit, maybe move it, up that needle, up that ladder just a little bit. Because if it's trending in the right direction, then, maybe we're starting to figure it out. But you guys also give really practical recommendations on the website for how to improve your vitamin D or how to improve your testosterone. And this shouldn't be a news flash to anybody, but normally it's reduce your stress, exercise more, do some strength training, eat appropriately, and sleep appropriately. So it's like easy.
I have so much to say. So, there's a couple of things that you touched on, and I think it's really, really, really important. And I want to dive into each of them, and I'm going to go in reverse order because the things that you talked about most recently. I think actually I'll keep going on. I'll actually leave it in order. Like you mentioned weed, for example. I'm actually glad you said that because I want to do a little bit more research myself, and we do a call with each of the. And I wish you and I did it before this or even during this because I could have had your dashboard and we could go through different things. But I often do a call with everyone to go through their results and whatnot. But weed isn't a question that I ask, but I think it's interesting because the reason that, based on when you were saying the VO2 max, and it brings a reality to it and whatnot, and so does tracking. I would say a lot of these things can actually be fixed through sleep, right? But the thing is, you can get a sleep score of 55, 60 every night. You just wake up, go and live your day, and you're like, yeah, shut up, watch. You don't know what you're talking about, in that sense. But then when you jump on and you see the actual result of that is low testosterone. A lot of people don't actually realize this, but 80% of your testosterone is generated in deep sleep, right? Everyone talks about strength training and all these kind of things. Deep sleep is where you generate testosterone for the most part. So you can literally tie your testosterone and correlate it straight back to your deep sleep and use that as a way to track it intermittently. If you improve your deep sleep, you will indirectly improve your testosterone, just generally speaking. But my point there is it all of a sudden becomes very real that sleep is having an impact on you, because then you can take that even further. Low testosterone leads to poor recovery, which leads to injury, which leads to all these kind of things. And then your injury is actually because you're not sleeping properly because it's infecting your testosterone.
Right.
And you sort of just keep cascading down, and all of a sudden it's not a sleep score of 42. It's a, Achilles injury or something like that, in that sense. And so it manifests into reality very, very quickly. But you brought up a really good point that I think about a lot, and that is the neuroticism around data, right? And I think that there's a Goldilocks of data, you know what I mean by Goldilocks, too hot, too cold, that sort of fairy tale. But I think every day is too often. And I think once a year blood testing is too infrequent. monthly is great. I think like fortnightly could be good if it was sort of like cost effective. But like for example, like I don't think sleep every night is that interesting, but your rolling 7-day average over a 30-day period sleep is interesting. And that's the
Right.
same with when it comes to like exercise volume and like it's really hard to lie to yourself when you look at that. Like if you said to me, like, how often do you train a week? And I'll just go, I don't know, like 17 hours. It was probably like the one that I did last week and the week before. But if I tracked it over like 3 months, it might be like 15.2, right?
Mm-hmm.
2.5 hours extra per week over 3 months is an enormous amount of difference, like in that sense, when it actually comes to performing. So the reason I say that is like it gives you a much more honest view when you're looking at those like rolling averages versus like if I
Right.
said, what's your average sleep score? You're going to just remember what you saw like 2 or 3 nights ago, not
Right.
what the actual truth is, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a key point as well. Now, when it comes to your results, like what you mentioned, like vitamin D is a really expensive test, but we've put it in our panel because it's so like most people think like vitamin D is basically a hormone that influences many functions throughout your body. And now that we live in a society where most people work indoors, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D deficiencies, like, a very real issue in that sense. So that's something that we're tracking just to, help people understand that they need to improve it. But what I would say is like it's interesting when you track month to month because people can say, well, that's an additional cost that I need to pay. But you can actually figure out what supplements are working and which ones aren't. So I
Mm-hmm.
just spoke to an individual on a call just then about their results, and I was like, what did you change? Like, I mean, your HDL went from like 43 to like 64 or whatever it was. And he was like, oh, I started taking this omega supplement. And I was like, oh, which one is it? Because it obviously works. Like in that
Yeah.
sense, like, and the thing is like, there's so many different kinds of supplements, and I would say like
Mm-hmm.
majority of them don't work. Like, and so like testing and making sure that those supplements are working is going to save you like a lot of money as
Mm-hmm.
well, and also make a massive physiological difference in the long run too.
Right, right. Because, and I mean, there's connections between, say, like low vitamin D and poor sleep. So if your
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D is low and that's leading to poor sleep, and you get less deep sleep, that could be leading to lower testosterone,
Testosterone.
which could then be leading to an inability to recover, which could then be leading to like these Achilles injuries that keep popping up. When you said that, with like the low testosterone inability to recover, that's like literally just been like what has happened to me over and over and over again. And it's one of those things. Again, I go into the doctor's office, I say, hey, they're like, oh, well, your blood pressure is good. You look healthy, you exercise a lot. It seems like you're taking care of your body. And I'm like, yeah, but what's going on under the hood? Because, even though this seems like I'm doing okay, I haven't had the ability to stay consistent in terms of my training.
Yeah.
And, then of course the question is, well, you're probably doing too much. And be like, yeah, but I'm not. Like I used to train 10, 15, 20 hours, and now I train 5 hours a week and I'm still getting injured. Right. So again, this is I'm so excited about this because now I can start to see, okay, well, if I pull the vitamin D lever a little bit, is that going to move things in the right direction?
Yep.
And in most of the time I do tell people, I say, supplementing with things just to supplement with them isn't going to give you any more benefit if you're not deficient in what you're supplementing with, essentially. So, for example, like the guy who had like the low HDL started taking the omega 3s. Most of the reason probably why that worked is because he was deficient in some level of
Mm-hmm.
those omega 3s, and now they're being incorporated, and it's resulting in better HDL numbers. So, from that perspective, it's almost like, giving you kind of targeted supplemental recommendations and giving you the ability to then iterate over time saying, oh, well, now my vitamin D is actually up to where it's supposed to be. I can probably like lay off a little bit, or maybe I take it more, intermittently, or, like whatever it is, or, oh, it's becoming summer. So now I just go out in the sun and I don't have to supplement with it anymore, as opposed to, taking like, like the big, pill bottle box of,
Yeah.
every single supplement under the sun, every vitamin, every mineral, every, whatever it is, and just kind of taking the shotgun approach. And then 99.9% of that is just wasted and peed out. And you're like, well, I didn't need that actually.
Yeah, and I think like most of these things are like most of the issues I see is like sleep issues and stress issues. Like honestly, like no supplement is going to save, like they'll help, but like they're not going to save you in that sense. And, you know, you made a really good point. You've got deficiency, but also you need to make sure you're taking it. It's like another question is like, why aren't you, you know, say for example, iron, like vitamin C helps like increases uptake of iron. So it's like, you know, maybe if you're consuming enough iron, have a look at like the things that actually help you uptake iron, and are you getting enough of that? And like magnesium also helps uptake of vitamin D, for example. So you got to sort of look at the things around those minerals that you're consuming to make sure that you're uptaking them. But something I think about a lot, I think people's relationship with supplements is kind of interesting to me. It's like this like devil or lazy thing that you do, where I think you need to sort of like step back and think about like, okay, evolutionarily, our bodies are set up in a specific way. Okay. And like, am I doing anything different to what my body was actually set up to do? Now, I can tell you right now, our bodies have not adapted to sitting inside for 9 hours a day on a computer screen. Like we spend like a lot more time outdoors. So like a vitamin D supplement makes a lot of sense. Like if you just logically think about it, it makes heaps of sense. Now for me, I take like more magnesium than the average person would because I'm training like 15 hours a week. Magnesium's an electrolyte. I'm sweating a ton of it out. However, if you're not doing that, then you don't need to like supplement with as much magnesium as I would do, and your daily intake's normal. However, like training 15 hours a week is not a quote unquote normal thing to do. So I need to supplement that behavior with something to help my body actually be able to do that. Like, you know, at the end of the day, you could even call gels some kind of a supplement at the end of the day, and you cannot get through an Ironman like comfortably unless you're supplementing a ton of glucose in that sense. And so it's kind of like, what are you doing and what do you actually need to do to be able to persevere? And you know, like sometimes like improving sleep just isn't realistic. Like say you're a father with like newborn and like all these kind of things, like just telling you to get more deep sleep to improve your testosterone. It's just like, what do you want me to do, man? So it's like, you know, just want me to let my kid die? Like, and so it's like you just have to look at your personal circumstances. And I think there's a lot of messaging around here around this supplement's perfect or this diet's perfect. You got to think about what's perfect for you and understand your physiology. And something that I've noticed a pattern of is like, you know, and we could talk about this as an interesting factor, is like low carb diets are like a really big issue, which I didn't kind of expect. And, you know, you can sit around the table and argue about the importance of like whether low carb diets or not work, but you get your blood results and you're like cortisol is elevated and your cholesterol's through the roof and like all these kind of things. It's like, it's not working for you, like in that sense. And, you know, I think it does work if you can get into ketosis or you're a very low stress individual or like whatever. Like I know low carb doesn't really match with ketosis, but like, let's just say you're carnivore, like you're going even like no carb. But the thing is like, your body very comfortably, like it's set up physiologically as glucose being the preferred fuel source. Well, lactate is, but glucose second. And so anytime like glucose is low or like your blood sugar's dropping, then you're going into a stress state just naturally. Like, you know, like your body is going into a more survival operation. Like, and so if you're already naturally stressed or you're putting your body under stress in your day-to-day life and then you're doing it nutritionally as well, then that's just going to manifest in like a variety of different places. If you're a monk and you have no stress and then you're going to do a low carb diet, you'd probably be okay, like in that sense. But it's pretty hard to do that as like a triathlete who has a full-time job, who does this, that, the other. You're just kind of like burning the candle at four ends, if that's even possible. But
No, I like that because now you can start to, again, like say for example, if you like, and you know, there's a lot of people who have been really successful on, you know, low carbohydrate diets, like even the carnivore diet, like other things like that. I'm not saying that, you know, one is optimal for others, but certainly when you exercise, you burn a lot of carbohydrates. And if you're already kind of a high stress individual, but now you're like, oh, well, I saw, you know, like whoever, you know, touting the benefits of like, you know, a low carb diet for X, Y, and Z. And I think I want to try it. You have every right to try it. Yep. But I think like tracking blood markers over time and seeing, you know, like for example, like, you know, maybe in the beginning, maybe for the first like month or two, you know, like like LDL, HDL, total cholesterol, triglycerides all go up because you're eating more fat. So you need, those triglycerides are going to go up. Your cholesterol, which is kind of like your shipping of fat molecules, to and from different portions of the body, those are going to go up. And then cortisol is probably going to go up as well, because what you need to do is what one of the main functions of cortisol is to liberate substrates from storage. So it liberates glucose from the liver. It liberates fatty acids essentially from your adipose tissue. So you have to essentially have higher cortisol in order to get more of that fuel into your blood, because you need to maintain the fuel sources going to your brain, going to your heart, going to your liver, going everywhere. And what you would expect is what you would expect it to kind of go up. And then hopefully, if everything is kind of going well, things will kind of normalize. Like maybe your cholesterol will stay a little bit elevated, comparatively to, like somebody on a lower carb or lower fat diet.
Yep.
But hopefully your cortisol will then normalize as well, right? But if there's something where it's like, well, I just don't feel good, and then both your cortisol levels and your cholesterol levels are just constantly elevated for months and months and months and months, chances are it's probably not the best intervention for you. And it's not one of those things where you're just like going to come out the other side 7 or 8 months later and just be a fat adapted animal. So it's
I have it's interesting you say that, because I've noticed like it works okay if you're like a lower stress individual, but as soon as you add stress into the mix, you start to see like weight gain. It's not just the LDL HDL aspect. It's like cortisol being a precursor to cholesterol. Like you're starting to have the stress from like the cortisol rise from the low carb diet, but then also stress in general. But the other thing that I'm seeing is like on like fasted glucose and triglyceride levels are a lot lower, which you would expect. But the thing is like then it seems to be impacting sleep as well, because blood sugar levels are dropping overnight. You're waking up in the middle of the night. A lot of people don't realize this, but like you can wake up in the middle of the night because of a blood sugar drop. You might just wake up and be like, oh, I'm kind of hungry, but like I can't be bothered to get up and like whatever. But your body has transitioned into a stress state. You've woken yourself up from deep sleep. Then back to the thing, your testosterone levels are lower because you're not having deep sleep, because your blood sugars levels dropped through the night, and like all these things. And like I'm not here to say low carb diet is bad. The only reason I brought that up as an example is like I'm sure it works for some people, but I have noticed a really strong pattern between people who have stressful jobs who also are training a lot that are having cholesterol and sleep challenges, and it's manifesting in high cholesterol, low testosterone, high stress, like in that sense. And like I've said, let's try increasing carbohydrates, especially around your workouts, and just explore that for a second and just see what happens after a month. And like I think it may not work. You don't like. I'm not saying that I have a particular preference either way. It's just something that I've noticed, and you notice these things when you do blood tracking. And so like sure, you're going to get temporary fluctuations and whatnot, but even when you're on a low carb diet, I'd still say like your cholesterol is still within a reasonable range. Like say someone might be able to get their LDL if they're like working hard on it between like 70 and 90, like let's just say like average 80 to 85. And let's just say that, somebody who's on a low carb diet is like 99 to 105. Like it's, not still ideal, but it's okay. If you're at like 120, 130, like it's like, okay, there's something not working here. Like in that sense. So it's like it's a whole different story. Yeah.
No, I know. It's it really does. Again, it should put context to whatever it is you're doing, whatever your habits, you have built in your life. And then again, there are fairly simple fixes. Simple isn't easy, but there are fairly simple fixes that, you should be able to implement, especially if the vernacular behind it is trying to make things more practical, right? So for example, like that, the dad who, they can't get any more sleep, right? They can only they can only be in bed for 6 hours a day. Okay, well, what things could we do, that would allow you to get into deep sleep faster. Okay,
Yep.
well, get off your phone 2 hours before bed or an hour before bed. Turn down the lights in your house so that it's more of like kind of like not intense light, but more of like kind of like the softer sort of light, which is going to help you be more relaxed. You'd come up with ways of switching off sleep and stuff like that with your spouse, if that is an option. Say, oh well, this time you go get the baby, next time I'll go get the baby. Or
Yep.
if you thrive on getting the baby all the time, you just go and get it, and then let your spouse do the other stuff during the day. And so it's again, there was somebody who was on this podcast. It was a great saying, and I love it, is what becomes practical, or what is practical becomes optimal.
Correct.
And so I could tell everybody on this podcast the exact best way to improve VO2 max. But if it is something that is not practical for you, like, if you had to swim in 55-degree water for, 4.5 miles every single day, and that was the single best thing to improve your health, but it's not practical because you don't even have any water around you for 70 or 80 miles, then that's not optimal. That's not going to be optimal in the long run. So again, I really like the fact that, you guys start to give those, kind of like practical recommendations. And I'm on my dashboard right now because
I think something you said that was, sorry to interrupt you. I think something you
No, you're
said is
fine.
really important with the practical thing, because like the other thing is that like when you think hormonally and the impact of hormones in your body, like you can change your hormones with your thoughts, right? So it's like your relationship with something also matters. Like I've also noticed people who have poor relationships with food, like the way they think about food, typically it manifests in worse biomarkers, like the stress that you have around eating or not eating or whatever, or like this, like say for example for me, if I love going to the track and running track intervals, like the impact that's going to have on my VO2 max compared to somebody who like stresses out and they hate doing it and like all these kind of things, and like it's kind of like not just it's like like the practicality also factors in your relationship with it. Like if you just hate it, it doesn't matter how efficient you can make it and like all those kind of things. It's just you're going to have a different experience than somebody who like absolutely loves doing a particular activity. But sorry to interrupt you. What were you going to say?
No. I'm going to go off of that because if you think about the way that like emotions manifest itself, if you absolutely hate something, and that's going to probably manifest itself as a higher stress.
Yep.
Things that are a higher stress are going to result in, like a higher deviation in your stress hormones. You're probably going to have, increased, cardiac response to the exercise that you're doing. And then that also may lead to you not being able to get into, more of that recovery mode following. So you're also
probably not going to be able to drop into flow, like to actually execute something and some.
Yeah. So it's all these different things, right? Where it's like, the way that I think about stress is there's a time component and like an amount component. So for example, everybody, like there's a lot of people going around, nowadays who are like, oh my gosh, I got this continuous glucose monitor, and every time I eat this thing or I go to exercise, I get a glucose spike. Oh, you have to avoid a glucose spike because a glucose spike is the worst thing possible. It's like, no, it's not. Because if the glucose spike only goes up to 120 and then it goes away in 5 minutes, that area under the curve is really small. So that glucose stress is actually really low compared to something where it was like, oh, well, if your glucose rises to 110 for 5 hours, that's actually area under the curve wise going to be much worse, in my opinion, because of it's not just the amount, it's also the time period. So
I wish people thought about glucose as like heart rate. It's kind of like everything is as it should be. It's like if you start sprinting and people will be like, yeah, I was running and my heart rate went to 180, and you're like, yeah, okay. But and it's like, and then it's like, yeah, well, like you engaged in physical activity, and like someone's like, I ate a banana and my glucose spiked. It's like, yep, everything is as it should be. Like you ate sugar.
Did your heart rate go back to normal after you stopped sprinting? Perfect. That's exactly how your body is supposed to function. Did your glucose go back to normal after you after you digested for 20 minutes or you went for a walk or whatever it was? Wow. It's crazy. It's crazy how your blood glucose. Go ahead.
Wearing a CGM is useful like I actually am in the same opinion as you. I hate this like methodology around like avoid spikes, like put your avocado
Yeah.
under your bread and then eat it like upside down or like whatever
Yeah.
people say. But the thing that I like about a CGM is that I think everyone should wear one at least once, so you can kind of
Mhm.
just see which foods spike you more than others, and just like know like what generally speaking how your glucose like relationship with glucose works. But also I think it's actually most interesting to see what's happening while you're sleeping, like in that sense. And
Mm.
like that's not a luxury you typically get. Like are you going like, is your blood sugar getting way too low while you're sleeping, and does that mean are you having enough carbs like towards the end of the day to actually drop into a deep sleep and stay in there and not wake
Mhm.
up in the middle of the night? That's more interesting than like I ate a banana and it spiked my glucose, like in that
Right.
sense. Like yeah.
Or when continuous glucose monitors first came out, there was somebody who was talking about, um, oh well, every time I eat a banana, like my blood glucose doesn't go up very much. Or no, it was like when I eat a cookie, my blood glucose doesn't actually go up very high, but when I eat a banana or when I eat, like a fruit, it just goes through the roof. And then it brought them down this rabbit hole of like of like allergies and like other things like that. And they were like, oh, I must have an allergy because of this massive spike and stuff like that. And I was just like, man, like I respect, again, the tracking and doing those sort of things, but like to completely abolish or wipe out, some sort of function, right? And there's a particular influencer that, gets brought up on like all of like the nutrition PhD people all the time, because all she says is just like, you have to avoid a glucose spike. You have to
Yeah.
avoid a glucose spike. You know what causes a glucose spike? Starting to exercise. And you want to know why? Because you release a shitload of hormones that are set to release substrate into your bloodstream so that your muscle doesn't starve your brain of glucose.
Yeah.
Like, so
So stop
and
exercising.
yeah, so stop exercising, guys, because it's going to lead to a glucose response.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so,
I
but
wanted to. Sorry, go.
gosh, no, I was just going to say, my point is that, if you go too far one way or the other, it's like, well, what's the performance response? Like I always say, okay, well, you have to measure outcome responses because, like the going back to kind of like the trend of like, high fat diets and other things like that. I did some studies where we gave mice, and mice aren't humans, so I'll just, get that
Yeah.
out of the way. But we did a study with female mice where we gave them high fat diet, had them exercise, high fat diet, no exercise, just exercise, and then, just a normal chow diet. And the crazy thing is that when you feed the body a high fat diet, you know what happens? Your body actually gets really good at using that fat, and then your mitochondria actually get good at using fat. So all of our markers of measuring mitochondrial respiration for fat oxidation increased with a high fat diet.
Yeah.
Exercise didn't override that or didn't do anything like that, but there's people who have started to make the connection that like, oh well, when you switch these individuals to a high fat diet, they burn more fat. And then they make the connection, oh, by burning more fat because of the high fat diet, not because of exercise, by burning more fat, we're going to spare more glucose. But I think there's a correlation there, but I don't know if it's like truly causation, because exercise causes an increase in both fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation and shifts your ability to oxidize fats to further down the line. And that is a functional change that results in better performance.
Yep.
I just don't know that just by changing a fat, like to a higher fat diet, that's going to lead to those performance changes. So my
It's a hard
point
one. I
is,
think it also. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah,
Finish what you were saying.
no. So my point is that you have to also have outcome measures as well.
Oh,
So,
sure.
so like recovery metrics or performance, like, if you're an Ironman triathlete, okay, do an intervention and then go see if your performance got better.
Yeah.
And along the way, measure your blood markers, measure your sleep markers, measure other things that could be related to that, and then start to sort it out, right? It's like the physiological markers, the blood markers are the black box.
Yep.
And how you get to better performance or how you get to worse performance is probably somewhere in that black box. So the more information you have that's actually useful, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I think it's also going to come down to what type of training you do and like all that sort of stuff. Like obviously the higher, like if you're training at higher intensities, you're burning less fat, like you're going into anaerobic, systems and stuff like that. So I think it really depends. I wanted to scale back just quickly to touch on something and then we can go back into the fat. mechanism, just because I just remembered something that I think was a really profound insight. Are you familiar with Ross Edgley?
No, I'm not.
So Ross Edgley is probably one of the most impressive ultra endurance athletes on the planet. He is famous for swimming around Great Britain.
He's like the crazy swimmer who,
Yeah, yeah.
I think, okay, I think I know who you're talking about.
He's got like the warmest energy. He just broke the longest river swim or something. He swam for like 57 hours straight or something like that. And he always talks about how like people say, how do you get through it? Like, do you just grit through it? Like sort of like a David Goggins kind of thing. And he said he doesn't. Like, he's an exercise physiologist, like a scientist in his own right. And he says it's more about like maintaining stability of thoughts, because he's like, anytime you're gritting through something, you're increasing stress. Like when you're like David Gogginsing it, you're like, oh, I'm going to get through this. And he's like, the problem is that takes a lot of energy, throws out hormone balance. Like he's trying to keep like he like focuses a lot on like hormone homeostasis. Like to swim for 56 hours, I have to stay as balanced as possible. Like in that sense, it's not about like, how do I just grit through this moment? It's like it's almost like a way of like anxiety management, where you just have to let every thought come and go, and like be almost in like a Zen monk state to be able to like do something like that. Because the second you throw your cortisol out or like whatever it is, you're just like using unnecessary energy that's literally being caused by your thoughts. Like if you're like, oh, I'm just going to Goggins this, like you're literally making yourself stressed more just off the back of thought. And that's changing like, your metabolic function. It's going to adjust your energy levels and all those sort of things. So I just thought it was interesting. But something else he said was, he's pushed the limit of carbohydrate intake. Obviously, like he's getting up to like he said 120 grams of carbs per hour, which is pretty normal in the triathlon world. But he was sort of saying they were pushing the limits. I heard, I don't know if it's true, but like Magnus and stuff are pushing like 180. But anyway, they said that they were actually adding, I think it was MCTs, like 120 grams per hour plus MCT, like triglycerides and MCT oil of some kind. I don't know the exact amount, but they found a really good balance where you could jack up the carbohydrate usage, but also jack up fat, and that balance worked really well. I think that works in the ultra scene more so than like the Ironman scene. Like they're operating at like, threshold, and it's a whole different energy system. When you're swimming for 56 hours, like you're basically in zone 1 or zone 2 in some capacity. So it's a whole different energy system, but still kind of interesting to what you're saying, where adding fat into that fueling mix, which typically hasn't been something people have focused on. It's always just been carbs.
Right. Yeah, it's that whole MCT addition to, your carbohydrates and stuff like that. I think it's been shown to work for some people, but then for other people, like I remember reading some research that was like, oh, well, we added MCTs with the idea. So MCTs or medium chain triglycerides or triacylglycerols are about 8 carbons long, and one of the benefits of that is that they don't require facilitated transport across your membranes, so they can get into the mitochondria and readily used by beta oxidation right away, much more efficiently than long chain fatty acids, which have to be activated. And then it's like, CPT1, and then there's another one called like CRAT or something like that. And then it's CPT2, which, does the opposite effect once those long chain triacylglycerols get into your mitochondria. But that was the idea, is that, we can bypass this circuit with MCTs. And like I said, to some extent, I think it kind of works, but then at the same time, it really depends on the person. Yeah. But if you think about it, even if you're intaking, say, like, if you were intaking 200 grams of carbohydrates, which is like unheard of, like I don't think anyone's ever, really got up to that, you'd have to be burning, in order for, you to get kind of like a caloric maintenance here, which is kind of what you're looking for in like ultras. You'd have to be, you'd be burning 800 calories, per hour just in carbohydrates if you're at 200 grams.
Yeah.
But we know there's limits to that. So maybe the limit is 100. So 400 calories per hour, like that's not unheard of, for a lot of people to be burning during exercise. So where does that other energy come from? Well, it's coming from endogenous sources, right? Either fats or carbohydrates. And a lot of the times that's why I think we're limited by why we're limited during really long endurance exercise is because of substrate availability. And by adding in those MCTs, we know that fat is much more calorie dense. So even if you could raise that, even if you could absorb that, like MCTs to say, what would be easy math? 10 grams per hour. That would be an extra 90 calories. So now you go from 400 calories to 490 calories. Okay, you just made that calorie deficit even smaller.
Yep.
So with these super, super long ultra endurance athletes, I think it comes down to more of like, we just need to get in as many calories as possible and be able to uptake, absorb, and use them during the work that we're doing. And
because it gets hard to absorb, right? Like I did 100-miler early this year. I consumed only gels the entire time. But the reason that I did that is like your stomach becomes so sensitive that like anything you put in at, hour 20 just makes you feel ill, right? And so you're like, you almost want to inject it into your bloodstream. Like the gel's so small that if I can just like suck it down, I feel sick for like 5 minutes and then I can move on, right? Whereas somebody who's eating like a sandwich every hour, like you feel sick for 55 minutes of that hour and then you're trying to like stuff another one down. That gets really, really difficult. So it's like, it's trying to like dance that dance of like, how do you take in as little as possible to like maximize the like calorie output? And so I don't know if I could like wrap that gel in fat, like MCTs or something like, and suck it down, and then I don't have to eat for like another hour or whatever. Like you're like happy about that. So it's a fine dance. I mean, the ultras versus the Ironmans are like two completely different things because the timing is a lot shorter. I mean, an Ironman is some kind of an ultra in a way, but like it's very, very different because the intensity level is much higher and different things like that. But yeah.
No, I think this is something, and this is one of the arguments for more of like lower carb, more fat adaptation as you get further and further along. Like the ultra is like you have hundreds of thousands of calories in fat on your body, even if you're a pretty lean individual.
Yeah.
So if you're able to better utilize that fat by, eating more fat in your diet and creating an environment where you're training in, say, low carbohydrate availability or something along those lines, then I can see that argument where it's like, well, now you don't have to take quite as many carbohydrates. And because if you take too many carbohydrates, your stomach's going to be messed up. You're going to be running to the bathroom, not the finish line. It's like, so you're walking a very, very thin tightrope. And as you get shorter and shorter and shorter in terms of distance, you're going to be doing more and more and more high intensity stuff and pushing those carbohydrates, because that becomes then the preferred fuel source. Makes a lot more sense, right? And you're probably not going to be as, say, like carbohydrate limited, as you get shorter and shorter in distance.
For sure.
But so it's a really interesting, nuanced sort of conversation. I've had quite a few of these, and I think the bottom line is it's like individualization, but how do you know what is best for you? And, just to wrap it back into this is like, you need to track things. You need to track how is your physiology changing over time? How is your blood tracking over time? You need to track how, like really anything that will give you useful, applicable data. Don't just track stuff just to track stuff and then just not use it. Cause then it's more like, okay, well, if you're never going to use your sleep score or investigate, like why your HRV is low after you drink or something along those lines, then it doesn't really matter.
But I also think it's a form of education, right? Like you'll learn and remember forever. Like, I don't know, everyone who's tracked their food, right, learned how calories work, how protein works, how fat works. Like you learn that I don't know, my experience was I was drastically under consuming protein, and that's like what most people experiences is, and you were like way overeating in terms of like portions of sugar and like different things like that. Like, and I never forgot it, right? Like I know, I don't track my food all the time, but whenever I look at my plate, I like have a distinct memory of like what I'm doing and what's happening. And so once you sort of start to learn the impact of sleep on testosterone, for example, like you don't forget. And then when you're like, I'm not recovering properly, what's going on? And then you're looking at your deep sleep. And so it's more an education journey than like being like a data nerd or like whatever it is, or like obsessing over everything too much. Because you can actually, I always say like, it's often the case. I don't know if I have like a really pretty way of saying this, but like when you're the student, you need to obsess, and when you're the master, you need to relax. Like in that sense, like it's
Yeah.
kind of like in order to learn something, you need to be a little bit obsessive, and then in order to master something, you often have to let go and learn to like chill out and be more in
Mm-hmm.
flow with what you're doing. And they're sort of very opposite states of learning and mastering something. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to, anyone who wears like a CGM or tracks their food for the first time will tell you that like they're changing their life and it's like the most amazing thing or whatever. And then like 2 weeks later, they're like, I'm so done with this. And but I
Right.
think you have to go through that process, like in
Yeah.
that sense, to sort of learn. And so that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of, I think people get so like, oh, I don't want to like track forever, or that's so much work or whatever. It's like, just like you operate in like your physiology, like your body is like an incredible asset that you have and that you've been like born into, and
Mm-hmm.
like you've never even read the instruction manual. You have like no idea how this thing works, and you kind of just like wake up every day just like making shit up, in that sense. But the thing is, like, your thoughts are really powerful in terms of like tricking you, like
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of like what I was saying about the van and like all those things mentally, and back to HRV. There's been times where I'm like, oh man, like I'm a little bit depressed at the moment, like not depressed as in depression, just my general energy state is depressed, like it's lower.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at HRV and it's like tanking, and I'm like, oh, like my body's not recovering. But in my thoughts, I'm kind of like, oh, do I really like my girlfriend that much? Do I like my job? And like, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with those things. I'm just like
Mm-hmm.
physiologically not in a good way. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
anything like in that
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
And so I think like just having those data points doesn't give you an excuse. It gives you like a solution and an understanding of
Yeah.
like what to do next. And yeah, like I think people can think about it too much on an obsession level rather than like thinking about it as an education, in that sense. And you can dial it back once you sort of get that deeper understanding.
Yeah, I really like that. I think like I've gone all the way from, tracking my food and doing other things like that, like weighing literally everything I would
Yep,
eat,
done it.
all the way to just being like, yep, I don't really care. I know this has a decent amount of protein. I know this has a decent amount of carbohydrates. Okay, I should probably eat some greens because I need those micronutrients and those sort of things. And after like you said, after you kind of get to that, like have that experience of learning what it is you need to be eating and kind of getting an idea, well, where are my deficiencies at? And then you can kind of fix those, and then you can spot check along the way. Like for example, like I still have like a calorie tracker or like a nutrition tracker. And every once in a while I'll just be like, let's just see, what my carbohydrates are, what my protein is, those sort of things, just to see, like if I'm on track, with stuff. So it's taking, kind of maybe like monthly, every 4 months, every whatever it is. But in the very beginning, it's like, okay, well, I got to learn how this works. I got to learn how this works. What is a protein, a carb, and a fat, like
And
those
I
sort of
think it's
things.
like interesting. I just had this thought of like, you want to build like an internal, like like accurate RPE. I know that sounds like
Yes.
weird, but like what I mean is like you have to track your heart rate to
Mm-hmm.
develop a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with like where you are in different heart rate zones and what that physiologically feels like. Now, when I run, I've ran so many times and looked at my heart rate so many times that if you just asked me blindly, I could probably tell you what zone I'm in that
Right.
sense. And so when you know what it feels like to have proper testosterone levels and you've tracked it enough times and you know what it feels like to have high testosterone and what it feels like to have low testosterone, you don't even need to test that often. You can like interoceptively go, there's something not right here, like in that
Right.
sense. And it's like, it's kind of like when you go out in those runs those days and like slow feels hard, and then you look at your heart rate and it's like through the roof, and you're like something's not right here. I know that. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
same as like back to HRV again. I always kind of know without even looking at my watch when my HRV is like, I just kind of know now. I've looked at it enough times to know how I feel in a given state or stage. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're trying to develop, is like a intuitive understanding of like intelligent intuition in a way, not
Yeah.
like, this is my girlfriend's fault because like she hasn't been, I don't know, whatever it is, giving me enough cuddles or something like that. Like what is
Right.
it
Right.
actually like
Yeah.
in that sense. So yeah.
No, I 100% agree. I just wrote down as you were discussing that, and then you said it, is intuitive. That's the mastery portion of things.
Yeah.
And I think there's very few people who actually get to that point because it's really, really tough. But you need to get to like, you need to go from, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's like, unconscious incompetence is like, you don't know that you're bad at whatever you're doing. That's like the majority of people.
Yeah.
And then once you start to realize, oh, maybe I need to change something, then you go from conscious incompetence, because that's that switch. You say, oh, well, I just learned that I'm actually pretty bad at this whole nutrition thing, or my blood work is messed up or whatever. And then you learn, and then you go to conscious competence, and then you want to go to unconscious competence, right?
Yeah.
That's the fourth step, but that's the mastery step. So even if you get like, say, quote unquote, stuck in the conscious competence, that is probably where you want to go. And then what you do is you use all of these tools, all these measuring tools that we're talking about, to reset that baseline. For example, like, and this is where I love physiological testing, because it allows people to kind of reset that RPE marker, where you say, because people have a tendency to deviate. Either above, if you're like kind of a type A individual, you have a tendency to maybe go a little bit harder, then a little bit harder, then a little bit harder. Then all of a sudden, every workout becomes the same sort of intensity. You're not getting any better because you're overtraining, you're under recovering, those sort of things.
You're trying to like score some kudos on Strava or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're the king of the mountain and everything, but then your performance is just trash.
Yeah.
Or you could be the opposite way, where you have a tendency to actually go lower and lower and lower, because you're like, oh, this is supposed to feel easy. And then all of a sudden you're not getting enough stress to actually get better.
Yep.
And by having that recalibration step of doing that physiological testing, whether it's every 2 months, every 3 months, 4 months, gives you the ability to be like, oh, I was a little low there. I deviated off the course, but you just course correct, and then you do it again.
Yeah. It's like a slap in the face. Like I'm always surprised by how much the body as like an adapting mechanism is like wild to me. Like, when you see someone who's like morbidly obese, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like have this thought. I'm like, how does that person feel every day? Like when you wake up, do you just feel terrible and you like go and make these like terrible decisions or whatever? But I've actually come to believe that they just feel kind of normal. Like they feel like lower energy, but like they just kind of feel like you probably do in like most days, like in that sense. And your body can kind of really adapt to whatever you like throw at it, and normal can happen. Like you can take a step down and then not realize that you did that and feel normal. Like that makes sense. And so that's what that physiological test is, kind of that like slap in the face. And it's like, no, you're not where you should be. You need to focus again. And like, it's kind of like you might have gotten to that unconscious competence, but then it's not a badge. You don't achieve it and stay there. In that sense, you will fall off the perch, and then you need a conscious reminder to like go back to like where you should be. And everybody has those moments. Like most people have them only once a year on the 1st of January every year. And then like other people have it like once a month or once a week or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, we're out of time here for you at least. Hopefully we can get you back on, or we can have another conversation. Like maybe walking through like my blood markers and those sort of things, just to kind of unveil or go behind the curtain to just see what people would get when they do sort of like the their initial blood tracking and those sort of things.
For sure.
Yeah, Robby, where can people find you? Where can people learn more about Rythm? Those sort of things.
Yeah, so we've just so you can find us on Instagram at Rythm Health. You can find me. It's Robby Wade. I would say Instagram's probably the most common place for us. Rythm is RYTHM, no RHYTHM. So just watch that. If you do want a bit of weed, RHYTHM is what you're gonna find. So I'd say rhythmhealth.com is our website. Come check it out. We offer a money back guarantee. There's no lock in on the product, and realistically speaking, just to sort of round out the product and set some expectations, once a month you get a kit in the mail that has one of these devices. We actually give you a little centrifuge that you get to spin your blood in, and this is yours to keep. And then you ship it back to the lab, and we display your results in a dashboard, like what Phil was just saying. It is a subscription, but you can cancel at any time. Or I didn't actually touch on it, but you kindly like brought it up. The Butcher Box scenario. What
Mhm.
Bill was mentioning there is it's basically with ButcherBox, you can be like, oh, I've ran out of meat. I need a box sooner. Or you can be like, I'm going to Kona. I need to push my box back. We're implementing a similar system. So if you're like, oh, I've got a race coming up, I need 2 kits this month, you can do that. If you want to like, test that your tape is working, or if you're
Mhm.
traveling or you just need a break, you can push it back a month or two as well. So it's not locked in. You can cancel anytime. You can move your kit around and all these kind of things. But the main thing for us was making it affordable. So it's $79 a month. This panel costs $300-400 typically to test. So yeah, couldn't recommend it enough. I know it's biased, but I'll give your money back if you don't like it. I stand behind the product in that sense. So go check it out. Rhythmhealth.com.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll put all the, your links to socials and those sort of things in the episode description and everything like that. If you guys have any more questions about like my personal experience with Rythm, I wouldn't get Robby on if I didn't actually really like the product, and I'll keep giving people updates as I continue to collect more blood samples and other things like that, because this is something that's really exciting to me. I'm on my way of becoming maybe a blood tracking master.
Let's go.
So we'll we'll see. Like I said, you can reach out to me on Instagram, Critical02, as always. You can comment down below if you're on YouTube, and you can even comment if you're on Spotify. So let us know what sort of questions you have. If there are any questions particularly for Robby, I can forward those to him, and then he can answer them. And then like I said, I think it would be really cool, Robby, if we could jump on a call at some point and just walk through like the dashboard. Maybe we'll put that on YouTube.
I think we should, like,
for,
regardless, like that's
yeah,
something you and I should do either way. And then you can just
Yeah.
get an understanding of what that process looks like. It's something we offer to every person who does a draw anyway. Like, we go through the results with them. Just to be clear to
Yeah.
everyone, it's not medical advice. I've just
right.
noticed a lot of patterns and have understand those biomarkers in pretty deep detail. Most of I'd say all of our recommendations are lifestyle orientated. Like, they're
Mhm.
things that are just generally going to work well for you. So, it's just a good reminder. It's that kind of conscious reminder of the thing that you should be doing. And, whether that's, again, the one we've mentioned multiple times through this podcast of like, focus on deep sleep and maybe take a really high quality magnesium supplement so you can increase your, testosterone, for example, like just something that's run of the mill, or vitamin D's low, pay more attention to that. So let's
Mhm.
line that up, Phil. I'll send
Yeah.
you a link. You can lock that in. We can record that if you feel comfortable posting it to your health data.
Yeah.
So that's up to you to make a decision on it in that sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to talk to people about this sort of stuff as much as possible, because it is important, and I really want to help people become kind of the healthiest, best, highest performing versions of themselves. And I think this is a step, at least for me, in the right direction. So, Robby, thank you so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate all your insights, and I'm sure we could probably talk for another 2 hours, and it would
For
seem
sure.
like nothing happened. But yeah, look for more stuff between me and Robby, just as like an explanation for maybe some of the blood markers and other things like that. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.